if you see someone like Wim Hof who says that dopamine increases 200% or 250% from an ice bath, it's because you've released your own UV light, and the UV light is what synthesizes the dopamine. So you can actually entrain your circadian rhythm through cold therapies.
Welcome to the Mindful Method podcast, where we don't just fill your ears, we fill your mind with the tools to enhance your emotional and physical reality. I'm your host, Jordana Sade, here to guide you on this journey of the body-brain connection and help you take your power back to create the life you've always wanted. So grab a seat, because class is in session and our method is on the syllabus. Here at the Mindful Clinic, we're not just changing your mind, we're changing your life. One mindful moment at a time. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Mindful Method podcast. I'm Jordana Sade, and today I have a very exciting guest. My friend Dave is here. We met under very strange, but I think serendipitous circumstances. We met through a mutual friend, Kristen Sweeting from EMR Tech. That's a company that does red light therapy. And Dave and I had a really interesting conversation over dinner about microbiology and quantum physics and red light and water. And I'm just so inspired by his story and so excited to dive deeper into full body healing. But I'll let Dave introduce himself because you'll do a much better job than me. Welcome to the podcast. And if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you here.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so I'm Dave. I'm formerly from Toronto, and my story is pretty interesting. About 4 years ago, I was working as a Toronto firefighter and just ran into a bunch of health problems. Uh, I'd been a chronic drinker for like 15 years, drugs, all that stuff. And then being a firefighter didn't help with that, because as a firefighter, you do shift work. So we're working 24-hour shifts. So as you know, from a circadian biology perspective, that's an absolute nightmare. So into that, my health started to plummet a lot with gut issues, brain fog. And then during COVID, with all the lockdowns, my mental health went down with it. Anxiety, depression, even suicidal thoughts, to the point that I actually got sent home from work and I got put on leave, and I was never able to return just because I didn't have the mental capacity to take on a role with like that. And was, living in Canada still, and couldn't find any answers, and became obsessed with diet, supplementation, spending thousands of dollars on naturopaths and the whole shebang, and just to experience no results. And mental health just kept getting worse, gut issues kept getting worse. And then I heard a podcast from Dr. Jack Cruz. That's when he started talking about quantum biology, everything light, water, magnetism. And just I don't have a science background. I didn't know what the fuck he was talking about at the time, but intuitively, he was talking about sunlight and grounding and non-native EMF and all this stuff, and I was like, wow, this makes a lot of sense. And I was not considering this whatsoever. So I started applying those practices and learning a bunch about it. And it was working. However, I felt as though it wasn't enough for me. So I ended up getting, from his advice, actually going to Mexico just for a whole journey of healing. So I went to, well, now I'm in Sayulita, Mexico, and I started applying all these principles in Mexico and doing all the stuff, doing all the sun gazing in the morning, structuring my water, all of this stuff, and was able to pretty much heal myself, especially my gut and my brain fog and all that stuff. Like, my gut has never been better in its entire life. And from that, I just realized that this is what I love. And I've continued to dive into the research. It's been 4 years now of studying it. And now I'm starting to educate and coach other people how to sort of take their health back using these quantum biology principles.
Yeah, wow. It's so crazy how our stories are so similar. I didn't actually know that you struggled with like addiction and stuff as well, but I really just feel like the people that I like attract and manifest to me in the podcast all have very similar situations where it's just like this rock bottom moment and like mind, body, soul health is completely off and then there's just this like massive recovery. So first of all, congrats on actually taking the leap and like really putting yourself first. And it's incredibly inspiring. A couple of questions just based off your story. So, the first thing that I want to dive into is can you just take me through the process of, applying these practices? Because also fun fact, you and I live both in Oakville or like your parents live in and so it's very rare that I meet someone from Oakville as well. But tell me, can you take me through the process of, applying these principles in a place like Canada, and then what was different when you shifted to Mexico?
For sure. Yeah, I was gonna say Oakville is probably the reason why we struggled with addiction.
Yes. Welcome to Cokeville.
Um,
Unapologetically.
that's a great question, actually, because I don't want to dissuade people that are living in Canada, because I think it's totally possible to heal in whatever environment you're in. It's just depending on where you are, you might need to go to more extremes. The thing with me is I was just so bad. Like I said, I was very suicidal. It was as bad as it could get. And I booked a call with Jack Cruz, and COVID was going on at the time too, so all the shenanigans with that, and you know how he is with that. And I'll never forget what he said. I was expecting him to give me some medical advice, or like you should do this, or you should do ice baths more, and he's like, you need to get the fuck to Mexico. I was like, okay. So I did it. And I believe moving to Mex or like going visiting Mexico initially, because as we'll get into, what's called like the quantum yield, the solar yield, the amount of sunlight you can get is so strong. I think that's why I was able to overcome a lot of these symptoms super quickly, because I was just like dosing myself like crazy. And on top of where I was, it's very low EMF. I was living in Hamilton actually, which is outside of Oakville, and there was 5G towers all around me and
Mm.
all that stuff. So I got myself out of a stressful environment like that. I was getting a lot of sun, but more so, there was also a psychosomatic aspect to it as well, where I was so convinced and traumatized being in that environment that even if I was doing all the right stuff, I was, the biology of belief, right? With Dr. Bruce Lifton, I believed that I would never heal
Yeah.
being in that environment. So that was an issue too that I needed to address, because I'm a former hypochondriac as well. Like the mind is very powerful, and I convinced myself of many things. So I think it was a combination of getting myself into an environment that I had convinced myself that was safe. And there's another really good book, I forget what it's called, about spontaneous remission. And the common denominator with that was hope, or it was either, yeah, it was hope and faith.
Mm.
So I also had the faith because Dr. Jack Cruz had told me. And you know the thing with doctors, right? When they give you a diagnosis, like the amount of times that manifests to the T, that's why it can be very dangerous when a doctor tells you you have 6 months to live.
Totally.
So on the contrary, the fact that he told me I would get better going there, I think that played a role as well. So I just want to make it very clear that all of these things can be doable, because I don't want to disappoint people and be like, well, I have a job in Canada, like this sucks. Like I think you can, just depending on your health level, you might need to do more extreme stuff. I do think if you have cancer or something like that, you should definitely move to the tropics, because, and we can get into this, you want a ton of melanin that's going to help you to create deuterium depleted water, because deuterium is a major issue with cancer. But if you're just genuinely unwell, or you want to lose some weight, or you have brain fog, I think it's possible to heal in wherever you are. It's just you need to figure out how to set your environment to be optimal for you.
Okay. Perfect. So when I go away, I went to Italy for a whole month, and like all my problems go away when I go away as well. And I'm talking about like physical problems. I've done a lot of work from the mental capacity, but just little things like I also had an adrenal crash. Like I was diagnosed with myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is like the deepest form of chronic fatigue, and POTS syndrome, and just like all these things that they were like, you're gonna live with it forever. And just like it was, I didn't. But sometimes those things come back when I'm in severe states of stress. And when I was in Italy, not only did all of that stuff go away, but like, looser skin because I've had two kids, and all of that like just tightens up. Like everything is lean. I feel amazing. I have so much energy, and it's really within a short period of time. And when I'm in Italy, I'm literally eating like ice cream and pizza and just like all the things that I don't eat at like every single day for every meal. And so can you just take me through, what is it about the sun? Like, why is this important, and how does it heal people? And you can explain it in whatever capacity that you know it.
Beautiful. Yeah, so the sun is everything. When you look at it from a spiritual level, we are light beings, right? And when you look at it from a quantum physics level, Einstein proved that we are energy, we are light. E equals mc squared actually means energy and mass are functional equivalents. So we are light, so it makes sense that we should be addicted to light, and light would heal us. Not to mention our matter is composed of all the matter that's composed of the sun, and all of life on this planet is here because of sun. Photosynthesis with the plant life. It turns out humans do their own form of photosynthesis. It's just slightly different from a biological level. So we're designed to be addicted to sun. So when you start to learn that, and you start to realize that our health is completely dictated from our circadian rhythm. And the circadian rhythm is just our 24-hour sleep wake cycle. But it's so much more than that. That's like the generic definition. It has to do like every physiological effect that we have, every physiological process we go through needs light signaling to be able to occur. And not just that, it's at certain times of the day where these things need to occur, and it needs the stimulus of light and actually temperature, which is really cool. We can actually use temperature to regulate our circadian rhythm, but that also has to do with light. So when you start to learn this, you realize that we have these photoreceptors in our body, differing photoreceptors. And this is what we're requiring. And it's actually to specify, it's the mitochondria that are looking for these signals. So if you remember biology class, we're taught mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. That's like scratching the surface. That's all they tell you. And they just leave it at that. And they say ATP is the energy currency of the cell. I actually don't think ATP is the currency of the cell. I think it performs a different function. The mitochondria create the energy for us. And without energy, we'd be dead. If the mitochondria wasn't producing energy, we wouldn't, the heart needs energy to be able to pump. And fun fact, the heart actually probably isn't a pump. We're now realizing it's actually a vortexer. Uh, and so the mitochondria, they're sensing the environment, and the input that it requires to create energy is not just food. We're taught that we need food to fuel the mitochondria, but the reason we eat food is to actually harvest the electrons from the food that have been programmed by the sunlight. But we can actually use sunlight directly as well as an input, and then the output is the water, the ATP, and the carbon dioxide, which all play a role in energy production. So when you start to learn that, and you learn that the different wavelengths of light serve different roles, and then you start to realize how to utilize them, that's where you truly start to be healthy. So do you want me to give you like an example of like,
Love that. Yeah.
okay, perfect. So basically, what I started doing, the first thing I started implementing, the first thing I started learning really was the importance of sun gazing. And sun gazing is like an ancient Ayurvedic practice. The Ayurvedic, some people call that like the original biohacking. And some people don't like that term biohacking. That's my Instagram handle. And just to clarify, the reason I call it biohacking is because I don't believe in using like machines and tech per se to optimize your health, but because we're so disconnected from society now, we need to do like certain hacks to mimic being in nature. For example, these blue blocking glasses protecting me from the screen. Shout out to EMR Tech. Uh, this is like a hack because this is allowing me to live in the tech world, um, to sort of have my cake and eat it too. So that's my definition of biohacking. But sorry for the small tangent. But yeah, Ayurvedic, they teach sun gazing, which is the concept of waking up right at sunrise and facing east and actually staring at the sun as it's coming up. And a lot of people think you can't stare at the sun. It's like, well, actually, you can, do what you want. Some people might have sensitive eyes or whatnot, but I'll just full disclosure, when the sun's coming up, I stare at it directly, and there's like no UV, so you'll actually find it's quite soothing in your eyes. And the reason you do that is because the strongest wavelengths at that time are the blue light, the visible spectrum of blue, and then the red and the infrared. And it turns out the wavelength of blue, we have these photoreceptors in our eyes called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, melanopsin, and they're designed to absorb frequencies of blue light. And what that does is it goes to the optic nerve and then it sends it to the hypothalamus into the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is our circadian clock. So this is the master clock that is governing everything downstream going in the body. So you can look at it like air traffic control. Air traffic control, there's so much going on and it needs to be governed perfectly. Like the timing needs to be so perfect because if one mistake is made, then chaos ensues. And that's what circadian dysregulation is. So when you get the blue light and it goes to that clock, it's signaling the body like, okay, it's time to wake up now. It's first thing in the morning. So it activates the adrenals. So you start secreting cortisol, dopamine, all these things that stimulate wakefulness and arousal. And that sets the clock and gets everything going. And then a little bit later in the day, that's when UVA rises. And then the UVA has completely different signals where it actually turns off the stress hormones and then it starts producing serotonin. It starts producing dopamine as well, actually, and beta endorphin and all this great stuff. And then you have UVB, which of course is vitamin D and then all of the metabolites associated with that. And then the cool thing is infrared and red is present like the entire time. 50% of sunlight is infrared, and you're getting that year round, whether it's winter, whether it's cloudy. And that is like directly affecting the mitochondria because the proteins within the mitochondria are red light chromophores, specifically cytochrome C oxidase. So that's why there's all this hype about red light therapy. Again, shout out to Chris and EMR Tech, because the red and the infrared specifically has direct impact on the mitochondria, which, as I alluded to earlier, is really running the show and is dependent on this circadian rhythm. So that's why sunlight is super important, because it's giving the signals, but it's not just that, it's giving us the information, but it's also giving us the energy.
Mm.
And how we survive and how we thrive is all about information, and it's all about energy. And the photonic signals, that's what it's all about. So it's all about living as if our ancestors would and getting the right signals at the right time. And that's, I'm going on a tangent here, but that's why I believe a lot of this chronic disease has ensued is, people can talk about the poison in our food supply and all that stuff, and that's playing a major issue. But I think the tech is the major issue, especially the artificial blue light at night, because everyone's using that at night. And as I said earlier, the blue light activates the stress hormones, which you want. Now, let me just remind you that getting the blue light from the sun, it's very high frequency light and it's responsible for the cortisol and the stress. However, Mother Nature has the antidote because, like I said, it's coupled with the red light and the infrared, which is very healing and rejuvenating. So that's why it's balanced. But when you're getting unopposed blue light without any other wavelength, like you would now on your screen or your phone or your iPad, that's actually very damaging. That's why a lot of people, I would argue that's probably why you got this chronic fatigue, because you're stressing the system too much and you're not allowing yourself to rejuvenate, because it also blocks melatonin at night when you sleep. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, there's so many, first of all, wow. great work. That was awesome. But there's so many things that I want to pull from there. But just to speak on the last thing that you said, my like routine at that time of my life was I would wake up at 4 a.m. every day. And like, so I wouldn't see the sunlight. I would get in my car, go to the gym, run for 2 hours, like actually 20
Yeah,
kilometers.
that makes sense.
At like, what's up? In all in the synthetic light, never seeing the sunrise. Then I'd get back in my car, sun's already up. I'm like driving to work in the synthetic light. I'm at work until the sun goes down. Then I leave work. So I'm literally never seeing the sun, like ever. And then on top of that, there's like the stressors and the food, and like there's it was a whole bunch of things. That makes perfect sense. Hi babes, I am so excited to talk to you about my signature program, the Mindful Method. This is the exact same method that I have been using with hundreds of successful clients to help you heal your relationship to food, to increase confidence, and to lose weight without dieting or killing yourself at the gym. If you're sick of not feeling like your best self, if you're sick of promising yourself that you'll start again on Monday, if you're sick of going on restrictive diets only to gain back the weight, I can tell you right now that if you gained it back, it did not work. You know what's healthy and what's not. You do. You just continue to choose the unhealthy option anyways. And a meal plan will not solve this issue. There is no amount of restriction or discipline or willpower that is going to stop you from self-sabotaging. The body follows the mind. Imagine a life where you don't have to think about what you can or can't eat. Imagine a life where you feel confident in all of your clothes, where every day in every way your body rebalances and you lose all of the weight so you find the truest, healthiest version of yourself. Imagine never having to start again on Monday. This is what happens when you focus on transforming the brain so weight loss is effortless. The body follows the mind, and it's time you actually get to the root cause of your issue. If you are ready to transform and find the truest, healthiest version of you without letting go of your favorite foods, I invite you to fill out the application in my bio. And if you're a good fit, we'll be in touch soon. Back to regular programming. So when you're sun gazing first thing in the morning as the sun is rising, approximately how long would we need to do that effectively?
The cool thing is you don't need that much of a stimulus, so you can do it for just like 3 to 5 minutes.
Mm,
And there's an app you can download. Shout out to Sarah Kleiner. I just interviewed her last week. She came out with an app called My Circadian app,
yeah.
and you can download that, and it will sync up to whatever location you're in, and it will tell you like what time sunrise is, what time UVA comes out, what time UVB. So you can look at it and know what time you need to be waking up. So I'll wake up a couple minutes before sunrise, and I don't have any. My whole house is just red light bulbs, by the way.
I know
I
I
have
can see that.
artificial light. Yeah, you can see it here. I love it. Like I've never slept better in my entire life from doing that. But yeah, I know when to go outside. It's right now. It comes out at 6:58. So I get out like 5 minutes earlier. I walk the dogs, and then I face east, grounded too. It's more beneficial when you're grounded. So when you're barefoot on the ground, and then yeah, you just need 3 to 5 minutes of the stimulus.
Perfect. And then I know it's obviously different everywhere that you are. So we'll put the link for that circadian app in the show notes. And then if you have like a code or anything you want us to add with it, just let me know. But so if the sun has like a whole bunch of different spectrums that are obviously beneficial, if we could make this into something that somebody in Canada could like actually implement in their life. So like first thing in the morning as the sun is rising, and then like where's the next milestone, would you say?
UVA is for sure. So this is very interesting when it comes to Canada. So obviously people are going to be saying, well, it's winter time, the UVA and the UVB is going to be very weak. I would still say get outside regardless throughout the day, make a habit of it because like I said, you're still getting the red and the infrared, which is having tremendous effects, and you actually make subcellular melatonin within your mitochondria from infrared light. And infrared light can actually penetrate clothing, they found. I just recently
Wow.
learned that, which is pretty cool. But so let's say it's spring and summer, you definitely want the UVA, which would roughly come out probably 2 to 3 hours after sunrise. Again, you can use that app to gauge it for you because it's different everywhere depending on your latitude. And it's the same thing. You want it entering your eyes and your skin because we have UV photoreceptors in the eyes and in the skin. And like I said, it turns off the release of the stress hormones so you don't get adrenal fatigue and things like that. That's essentially what adrenal fatigue is when you just have too much cortisol pumping, and that's a result of the overexposure to tech. So
Mm.
it turns that off. It creates nitric oxide, which improves blood flow. It does all this other great stuff, and it creates serotonin and dopamine. I did a post earlier saying that sunlight is the ultimate antidepressant because it has all of the medicine in there to help with that. Because UVA creates serotonin and dopamine, which I'm sure everyone's heard of. Those are like the feel good hormones, neurotransmitters. So the next stimulus would be to get UVA exposure. Now, here's the really cool thing that I find super fascinating for the Canadians out there that are complaining that they don't get UVA in the winter is you can create your own UV light in the form of what's called biophotons through cold thermogenesis.
Ooh.
A researcher named Fritz Pop realized that we create our own UV light, and it's called biophotons. It's ultra low UV light, and so when you get exposed to cold, the mitochondria, I forget the exact mechanism of how it works. Um, I'm drawing a blank on it, but it will create infrared light to heat up because the body's trying to heat its core temperature so you don't get hypothermia. So you're
Mhm.
getting the infrared light internally, but you're also getting the UV light. And that's actually why if you see someone like Wim Hof who says that dopamine increases 200% or 250% from an ice bath, it's because you've released your own UV light, and the UV light is what synthesizes the dopamine. So you can actually entrain your circadian rhythm through cold therapy. So you can do ice baths, but there's this, I was listening to this great podcast, Decentralized Radio, and one of the hosts, Tristan, he lives in Wyoming and he's into all this stuff. And what he does, because they get winter as well, is you need to embrace the seasons. So in the winter time, that's another thing is not only have we altered our light environment, we also have altered our temperature environment where it gets cold. People don't want to face the cold, so that we have the heating inside and stuff. I think people should embrace that and go for walks and stuff and just
Yeah.
feel the cold air. So then the mitochondria is going to know, oh, it's winter time, it's cold, it's going to be producing the red light and it's the UV light, and you're going to be getting the benefits as you would from just receiving the UV light from the sun, as if it were spring or summer. So cold is another great way to regulate your circadian rhythm for those of you that don't get a lot of sun in the
Yeah,
winter
so like
season.
no excuses if you're in Canada. Like just go out in the cold.
Yeah,
And then I'm assuming that like another really good time would be as the sun is setting, right? Because then that like
definitely.
yeah.
Definitely. So, like I said, the UVA mid-morning, and then of course in the afternoon is when you're getting the UVB, and that's when you get vitamin D. And I just recently started learning this too from Carrie Bennett. She's another great quantum biologist educator. Because a lot of people, and this actually ties into our conversation that we had at dinner pertaining to vitamin D supplementation. It was so synchronistic because you were talking about that, and I know Chris was sort of giving you a tough time. I hadn't been super well versed on it, but a video came up a couple days later from Carrie, honestly kind of like proving what Chris was saying is like maybe it might not be the best idea. And again, I'm not super well versed, so I'm not giving
Yeah.
this as advice.
Yeah.
I can give you the link to the video so you can look for it for yourself.
Yeah.
But she's actually saying that melatonin and vitamin D use the same receptor. So actually, we're designed to get a ton of vitamin D in the summer, so get a ton of UVB exposure in the sun. And I can get into how people can safely get more sun exposure without burning the shit out of their skin.
Hmm.
But get a ton of UVB and you'll store that within you. But in the winter, you're actually designed to sleep more and get more melatonin. So it was really interesting to learn, especially because as I said, red light creates melatonin. So if you're embracing the temperature, you're going to be creating more melatonin and less vitamin D. And melatonin supposedly binds to the same receptor. So it might be that people at northern latitudes evolved to not have as much vitamin D in the winter, but replace that with adequate melatonin levels. Now, I think where the problem lies, and maybe this is where vitamin D supplementation come into play, is that people aren't really producing melatonin because they're messing up their circadian rhythm with the blue light. Like we create subcellular melatonin within the mitochondria from the infrared light, and that's everywhere. I just recently learned this. So we have the subcellular melatonin that will be created throughout the day. And that's like doing the cellular cleanup. But the majority of the cellular cleanup happens at night, and that comes from pineal melatonin from the pineal gland. And that requires darkness to even be able to be secreted. So
Yeah.
when you're not
Like
wearing
full
the
darkness.
glasses,
Yeah.
exactly, full darkness. So if you're not blocking the blue light, and if you're just on your screen, you're watching TV, you're not blocking the melatonin. And then that's why I think people often get sick in the winter, because the melatonin is also an antioxidant and positively impacts the immune system and stuff. Yeah, and so they're not getting the vitamin D and they're not getting the melatonin either
Yeah.
because they're not blocking it, and they're not getting cold, and they're not doing red light therapy or saunas or ice baths. So they're not creating melatonin and they're not creating vitamin D. And as a result, people start getting sick in the winter.
Yeah, that was a great explanation, and we're just not going to tell Chris that he was right about that. So thanks. Okay, so I'm getting the full picture about the circadian rhythm. You've done a great job explaining that. I want to actually shift into, we had an interesting conversation about water, and you actually mentioned in the beginning, you were like, now I structure my water. Like, what does that mean? What are you doing here?
Yeah. So water is not all equal, as I've come to learn. And well, I'll first talk about the water within us and how like you should try to create water that mimics that. And when I say create, it's not even creating, because if you're get like water in its natural form, like from a spring, is structured. And I'll explain in a moment what that means to be like structured water. Let me just tell you, the water that most of us are drinking are not is not structured, because first of all, if you're drinking tap water, like you got to stop that. That's because not only it's completely like water in its natural form, it's always moving and it's vortexing. And that's how it collects its energy, and it's getting mineralized from hitting the rocks and hitting the soil and stuff like that. But from a tap, it comes from like the nearby facility, and it's stagnant. And like stagnancy is like death. Like that's why we need movement to be
Yeah.
healthy. And actually, that's the reason why movement is so good for us, because we're structuring the water within us.
Whoa.
And on top of that, there's videos where you look at the pipes and it's just filled with garbage. Yeah, don't even think about it. And you're getting heavy metals. You're getting they use what chlorine to clean it, but chlorine is a biocide, so it acts as an antibiotic, and everyone knows like antibiotics completely destroy your gut microbiome. So you're getting that. You're getting fluoride, which a lot of people are like, oh, fluoride. There's a ton of information coming out right now that fluoride is a neurotoxin. There's a study
Okay,
showing it
cool.
actually lowered IQ in children. It calcifies glands, so it calcifies the pineal gland. A lot of people
Thyroid.
listening to this, if you have hyper or hypothyroid, you
Yeah.
definitely have a fluoride toxicity, so you need to detox that out.
Yeah.
And then, not to mention, there's trace amounts of pharmaceuticals found in tap water. So that's bullshit. You need to stop that. But also, like a lot of the bottled water you're getting is purified. So first of all, a lot of it's in plastic, so you're getting the microplastics seeping into it. But if it's just reverse osmosis or distilled, that's a great first step, because those are very good processes to eliminate toxins. But when that process also completely takes out all of the minerals of the water, and it's also non-structured. So you're actually drinking a water researcher, Victor Schauberger, calls it immature water or dead water. It doesn't have any of the life force to it. And if you're drinking water without life force, it's just going to act the same as you. And from what I've learned is that water needs to be mineralized. So it's going to search for minerals. So when you drink reverse osmosis water or distilled, it's going to demineralize you. So it's actually dehydrating you. So drinking a lot of water, this water researcher, Isabel Friend, which I highly recommend. A lot of this stuff I learned from her. So I would say go to the source and learn from her. She has a great free webinar and also courses you can take. Drinking a lot of water is just irrigation. What hydration actually is whether the water molecules can actually bind to the cells. And it turns out for that to happen, it needs to be mineralized and it needs to be structured. So what structured means is that you have water that is non-structured. So when you look at it under a microscope, all of the water molecules are jumbled around and like chaotic. And structured is a completely different molecular form. You were to look at it under a microscope and it's an orderly hexagonal pattern. All of the molecules are bound together to create this form, which is actually identical to what a quartz crystal is. So it actually is a liquid crystal. And a quartz crystal or any crystal really is able to emit, transduce, store energy, whether it be light energy, information, things like that. So drinking structured water. So when you go to a spring, like I said, it's moving and vortexing, and that's what creates the structure. And because it's this perfect crystalline lattice, it's actually absorbing the photonic energy from the sun, the life force energy, and then it's mineralized as well. So when you're drinking it, you're actually drinking this life force energy, and you can get amazing healing effects. That's why there's so many stories of like, what's it called? Saint Bernadette's Grotto in Lourdes, France. If you ever watched the Down to Earth episode with Zac Efron, I loved that show. I didn't like the second season because they got kind of like political a little bit in Australia. But anyways, the second episode in the first season, they go to Lourdes, France, and they talk about like there was so many spontaneous healings at this spring, and it's because it was structured water and it was also higher in molecular hydrogen, which, as you know, H2O, water has hydrogen in it, but molecular hydrogen is like a potent antioxidant. And there's some springs that have like higher levels of hydrogen. So that's why it had these healing properties. But yeah, another thing I learned too is when you drink water, it becomes your blood within 5 minutes. So
Wow.
just think about that. So if you're drinking water that has this potent life force energy, it's going to be becoming your blood, it's going to become you. And one thing I'll just add to structured water is there's these great researchers. There's Dr. Emoto, there's Veda Austin, and there's Jared Pollock. Jared Pollock, I'll talk about that in a second. He's the pioneer of exclusion zone water, which is super interesting. But Veda Austin and Dr. Emoto did a lot of crystallography tests where they would freeze water, or sorry, they would blast frequencies at water to determine like what the molecules would look like after the fact. So Dr. Emoto would play like harmful, very negative music with like low frequency, and then he'd freeze the water and then look at it the next day and it would be all chaotic and look like horrible. And then he noticed when he played classical music, or it's not even music, he would even infuse it with love and gratitude and prayers and all these as he take a sip of water. And then
Non-structured, yes.
he would freeze that water and you'd look at it under a microscope and it would form these beautiful geometric like snowflakes, and it was just beautiful, like beautiful art. And from that they proved like water is sentient, water has consciousness, and water responds to frequencies, whether it be thoughts, emotions, things like that, and it stores that information. So when you think about it, if you go to an untouched spring and it's just connected to nature and love and harmony in the sun, it's going to be infused with so much positive energy. But you
Mhm.
can only imagine the trauma the water goes through when going through one of the treatment plants or the tap or even the bottled water. So that's another element too that people don't often pay attention to, and people often think is woo woo, but there's like a ton of science proving this. And when you get into quantum physics, you realize everything is consciousness. Everything is energy, and fundamentally it's all consciousness. So
Yeah.
to say that it's woo woo, it's like, well, you don't really have a good understanding of what quantum physics has discovered, or and you obviously haven't done like a plant medicine ceremony that will
Right.
often show you that. Not that you have to, but that often helps because it shows you directly, like, oh, everything's connected.
Right.
So yeah, that's what structured water is.
So, I'll just touch on the woo woo thing for a sec, but I was having a conversation with somebody else on my podcast, and like now we can actually research and like understand quantum physics, and that's incredible. But if like what we're calling woo woo is actually just practices that like we've been doing since the beginning of time, since before we've even had to read. And so it's just so funny that like we have to, like, people are like, oh, it's just like spiritual whatever, but actually like we this is how we were designed to function. And so we're just really coming back to like the practices from before our and now we need like research and science to back it up, and it's cool that we can do that, but like the fact that we even have to is kind of crazy. um
Not,
yeah.
yeah. And the mainstream science too is pretty corrupt.
Oh, for sure. It's like the same companies will sell you the drug, or the same companies will sell you the poison and the drug that like counteracts that. And my whole thing with the like pharmaceutical industry and all of it is just like the government actually doesn't want anyone dead because you're not profitable. They want you sick, like just
Yeah,
sick
you're
enough.
not a good
Yeah.
customer if you're, well, I guess
Yeah,
they get the estate taxes, but
true.
you get more money if you're sick and just taking the pills.
Okay, so if we don't have a natural spring near us, I have a friend, his name was Jake, and he was on my podcast too. He's like a bodybuilder, and he was obsessed with going to the spring and like getting the water from there. But if we don't have that available, he also got E. coli, so like I'm a little bit
Yeah.
cautious. But if we don't have that option where there's a spring near us, like can we just put the water, this might be a stupid question, can we just put the water out in the sun and then drink it?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. So yeah, good question. So the first thing you should always do is look for a spring, and you can go to findaspring.com and it can show you if there's a spring near you. But like you said, you need to be careful. Like, well, a lot of people will test it and be able to tell you whether it's safe to drink or not, but
Mhm.
there is the risk of that. But if that's not an option, I'll tell you exactly how to create the perfect
Please.
water.
Yeah, tell
There's a
me.
lot of different water filters you can get. The one I really want to get is happens to be the most expensive one, so I'll just mention it, but it's probably maybe not financially feasible for a lot of the listeners, but it's called the Spring Aqua Wet 7. And it's an under counter device. And what it does, they've used the technology to identically mimic the exact water you would be getting from St. Bernadette's Grotto in Lourdes, France. So it filters it, it structures it, and it even adds molecular hydrogen to it. And it's not using electricity or anything like that. I'm not even sure how exactly they've just mimicked the technology of nature and how that particular spring comes to be. So that's like a really good water like filter that gives you everything in sort of one. But for a more budget friendly, I was formerly using the AquaTrue. It's a countertop reverse osmosis system, and I think it's like 400 or 500 bucks, and you can do payment plans and stuff. That's what I did.
Mhm.
And like I said, if you're just drinking RO water, that's not good enough, but it's really good at getting all of the contaminants out. So you would first get that. You first need to filter it, and then you want to remineralize it. So I'm right now, and I don't have affiliations with any of these companies, by the way, but I'm using Aussie Trace Minerals, and that has like full spectrum minerals. I forget where they harvest it from, but I know it's a good source. And there's also Quinton minerals you can get, and there's probably several other brands you can get to remineralize it. And then to structure it, what you can do is there's a couple things. I have this Analemma wand. The company is called Analemma. We can put it in the show notes, and it's literally like a quartz crystal wand. And inside this wand, they already have structured, coherent water that they call the mother water. So when you stir your drink of water with this wand, it transfers the structured energy from this water, because remember, quartz is an antenna that can emit frequency, and it will structure the water. And they have all of the tests to prove this. Like Analemma has so much research on water
Wow.
and the tests they've done using this device, and they've been on multiple podcasts. They've been on Paul Chek's podcast, which I recommend is good. So it's just a wand that you can stir for 10 seconds and it will structure the water for you. So that's great. There's also different vortexing devices you can get that will literally spin the water and vortexing it, bringing energy. And to answer your question, yes, like putting it outside in the sun grounded and receiving the photonic energy from the sun is also a great way. So what I do is I filter my water, and then I'll add the minerals, and then I'll structure it. I actually will sing to my water too, to infuse it with positive energy. And
That's
that's a real
amazing.
thing. That's a real thing. It works. And I do it to my dog's water as well, and they're healthy
Oh,
as fuck. They drink the best water. And then I'll go outside in the sun and I'll hit it with sunlight. And I know that seems like a lot, but like honestly, you can like prep this the night before. Like drinking good quality water is so important. And you'll notice it really hydrates you. So you don't need to be drinking like 6 liters a day. Because as I said, when you're drinking structured mineralized water, it's actually hydrating you where it's binding to the molecules. Whereas if you're drinking RO, you're probably drinking a shit ton of water and you're just pissing it out because it's not truly hydrating you.
yeah. I do not need another reason to buy another crystal, so thank you very much for that. I'm like, done, add to cart immediately.
And
Um,
it's only like $140 too. Like it's super cheap for what it does for you. It's great. I love
yeah.
it.
Wow. Okay, this has been like such a fun conversation. You are so knowledgeable, Dave. Thank you so much. Can you just tell my audience like where to find you? If somebody wanted to work with you, what would that look like? And we can just put everything in the show notes as well.
For sure, yeah. So my handle is at Dave the Biohacker. You can find that anywhere. That's the main way to find me. And yeah, I'm like a quantum health coach. So I teach you how to just better your health, varying what it is. I mean, a lot of people have been coming to me with anxiety and depression and stuff just because I have experience with that. But if you have thyroid, gut issues, chronic fatigue, anything like that, circadian rhythm optimization is honestly what you need. And of course, depending on who you are, everyone's different. You might need certain particular things also, but most people aren't really paying attention to circadian rhythm. So I'm a coach on that. And my goal is to get you to optimal health, but more importantly, to teach you how to do it yourself and to teach you to be your own doctor. So you don't need to be, spending money on big pharma down the line.
Yay. Thank you again for coming. Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you like this podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe and give Dave a follow. And you can share it with somebody who needs it. And I will see you back on another episode of the Mindful Method podcast. Bye.